of law in America is hanging by a thread. The Supreme Court is hearing critical cases that could undermine free and fair elections. The White House is literally being torn down. The very foundation of our democracy is being tested. Today's guest, Senator Richard Blumenthal, has spent his entire career fighting to uphold justice. In this interview, we discuss what's happening at the Supreme Court, how backroom deals are behind Donald Trump's ballroom vanity project, and why defending the rule of law may be the defining battle of this generation. But first, subscribe to this channel to stay informed about how you can defend democracy. Senator Richard Blumenthal, welcome back to Defending Democracy.
Wonderful to be with you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
All right, there is a lot going on in the world. There's a lot going on in this country. We still have, military deployed in our nation's cities. We have Donald Trump making noises every day that sound more and more like a dictator. He has literally now started tearing down parts of the White House, big chunks of the White House. And I know you've been at the forefront of that accountability measure. So I want to start there because in some ways that is like the metaphor. The tearing down the White House is kind of the larger metaphor for I think what will be a lot of our discussion.
It is a very apt metaphor, Mark. That's exactly the right word. And I will tell you just at the outset, I have been really surprised by how tearing down the East Wing of the White House has really struck a nerve. Going back to Connecticut, as I do every weekend, talking to people, I thought, well, it's an inside the Beltway story. All of us who drive by the White House frequently or who have been in it or who go through the East Wing to get to ceremonies, we care about it, but the rest of the country, not so much. But it has really hit a nerve and struck a chord with people who understandably see the images of that great big claw backhoe tearing down an iconic cultural monument. It may not be that old, but it has been a symbol of America all around the world. And I think it is a metaphor for what Trump is doing. And not only that he is destroying something iconic, but he's doing it without asking anyone, without seeking any kind of approval or permission, whether it's even from the preservation authorities. You and I, when we want to build an addition to our home, have to go to the local zoning people and, or someone when we tear down a tree, which I did on my house in Connecticut, I had to get the town government to come out and approve tearing down the tree and putting another one in. And he's just demolishing the East Wing without the preservationists or without congressional approval. And where I have been leading is on seeking answers about the sources of the funding for the ballroom, which raises a whole host of other questions apart from the permission that he has failed to seek in demolishing the East Wing.
Yeah, I think they're connected, right? I mean, the fact is that he thinks he can act with impunity, and he is relying on the fact that Republicans in Congress won't do anything to hold him accountable. They won't do anything to put a speed bump in his way. But meanwhile, oligarchs will fund whatever it is he wants. So talk to us a little bit about that second part. We're going to talk about Republicans in Congress in a minute, but talk about that second part and it's beyond capitulation, Senator. At some point we have to just start saying it's collaboration, right? Like capitulation assumes that they are the victims of something. At some point they actually are just kind of like joint ventures in this administration.
They are complicit.
Yeah.
My Republican colleagues are aiders and abettors of corruption. I know that sounds like an exaggeration, but actually it's an understatement. They are enabling him to take money from 37 companies that have matters pending before the federal government, many of them. Comcast has a merger
Right.
that they want reviewed. Lockheed Martin has contracts to build Joint Strike Fighters. The Google and Microsoft companies have contracts to do various kinds of work. And I could go on, but I've written every one of those 37 donors, and together they're contributing 300 and plus million
Holy moly.
dollars.
I had no idea it was that much.
And I want to know the questions I'm asking. How much are you contributing? What agreements, if any, have preceded that contribution? Who solicited you to make the contribution? And other details about how they are forking over and footing the bill for this East Wing monstrosity. And frankly, I regard it architecturally as a monstrosity, but I'm not getting into the art review here. But I am going to be writing the construction companies and the architects to know
Mm,
how they were selected. You
correct.
know, it was not through
Right.
competitive bidding.
Right.
And what's the benefit to them? What we have here is, in effect, a shakedown by the White House and the president, or pay to play.
Right.
And Republicans know it's happening, just as they know that Trump is benefiting from the crypto scheme that he has erected with the family of Steve Witkoff, his special ambassador, just as they know he has gotten that $400 million jet from Qatar, and the money that's coming from the UAE. So it is corruption and self enrichment. And again, it is a metaphor for everything else that's happening. And you use the word, I think, totalitarian. We are in the midst of a totalitarian seizure of power.
Yeah, we are. And you're exactly right that that the Republicans in the Senate, the Republicans in the House, starting with leadership and all the way down, are seemingly willing to go along with it. And I'm just curious if you have any, I'm not going to ask you to name names, but do you have any sense of, there's like several possibilities. One, they don't know it's wrong, right? They've totally lost their moral compass. Number two, they know it's wrong, but they are afraid to say anything. Um, I guess number three, they just are willfully blind. They don't think about it. Like, do you have a sense of like why Republicans in Congress don't have enough self-respect to defend their own constitutional prerogatives?
Well, Mark, you have extraordinary experience and knowledge about uh, people who represent us in the United States Congress. And uh, you have a lot of experience also in the elective process that puts them there. And I think it is all of that, all three. Some of them are in denial. At some level, they know it's wrong, but they're just not ready to face it. And then some of them know it's wrong, and they are in fear or in thrall of Donald Trump, and uh, others who would know it's wrong and perhaps not like it, simply don't have the backbone or the courage to stand up to him. And I've said to people, and you and I have known each other for quite a while. I stood up to Joe Biden,
Yes, you did.
when I thought he was wrong. I
Yes, you did.
actually uh, led a veto override to Barack Obama
Yep.
on the JASTA Act, and he didn't like it. For sure, he didn't like it. But when you have a conviction and you believe in something, I think ultimately presidents respect you. Donald Trump does not, because Donald Trump has no beliefs and he doesn't understand what it is to have a real conviction where you just say, I'm standing my ground here. And Republicans, I don't think, are willing to stand their ground on any of it. And the ones who may be inclined to do so have left
Yeah.
or are leaving. And that's a
So
tragedy for the country.
it is. And the real tragedy is that, you know, these Republican senators are afraid to stand up to Donald Trump. And yet, you've stood up to Donald Trump. As you point out, you've stood up to Democratic presidents on principle. You've stood up, though, to Donald Trump. And actually, Donald Trump has targeted you. Like, Donald Trump has called you out by name and has made threats against you. And yet, all that has done is stiffen your spine and caused you to be actually more, stalwart in doing what's right. And so I want to ask you kind of what that feels like, for you, but also, like, don't Republicans see, well, if Senator Blumenthal can do it, I certainly, as a Republican, am not in the same crosshairs he's in. They don't see anything from that example, huh?
I was probably the first to be attacked by Donald Trump in his first term, and it was
Oh, wow.
early in his presidency. And I'll tell you this little story. I hope not boring you, but
No.
it was at the time of the Gorsuch nomination. And I met with him. He was a Court of Appeals judge. And at the time, Trump was attacking judges. And I said to him, isn't it really damaging for the President of the United States to be attacking members of the judiciary, which was novel at the time? Presidents just didn't attack members of the judiciary. He said, yes. And I went out after our little interview, private interview, and I said, I'm not sure what I'm going to do about voting for Judge Gorsuch, but I was impressed that he lamented attacks by the president on members of the judiciary. Well, that precipitated an attack by Trump, who said I was lying. And I'll never forget, I was about to do a cable interview, and my press person, it was 7:30 or early in the morning, showed me her her phone with Donald Trump's tweet attacking me as a liar. Meanwhile, Gorsuch had confirmed that he
Of
had
course,
said it
right. Donald Trump
because he
doesn't do
wasn't a liar.
right, Donald Trump doesn't do
And I thought to myself, my God, the president of the United States. And this was before he was attacking everyone for everything. And um, I did the interview and gave the history of that incident. My One of my kids texted me right after the interview, and he said, being attacked by Donald Trump is a badge of honor.
right.
And that has always stayed with me. So when you say what gives me the impetus or the wherewithal to stand up to him, it's a badge of honor in my view to be attacked by him. And I have found, you know, these many years later, um, almost 10 years later, that standing up to him is not pleasant when he attacks with vitriol and his vile, crazy lies, but it is the price of trying to defend our democracy. And everyone should be ready for it because he will lash out. He will lash out when we cut too close to holding him accountable. He will lash out when we ask why he is using the Department of Justice, weaponizing it against his political enemies, or dropping investigations against a top official in the Department of Homeland Security who accepts $50,000 in a bag, or why he's cutting
A kava bag, let's not forget.
or all the other stuff to hold him accountable.
Yeah, and so I wanna talk to you about the courts, and I wanna talk to you about the Department of Justice. So let me start with the Supreme Court, which you mentioned, Justice Gorsuch. Um, there are a lot of people who are quite worried about the direction that the courts are taking. The lower courts seem to be holding, the lower courts seem to be holding Donald Trump accountable. The courts of appeals, a little bit more of a mixed bag. The Supreme Court has been, I think more difficult. The Supreme Court's also hearing a critical voting rights case out of Louisiana that we're waiting on. I am clear-eyed about the Supreme Court. I don't apologize for them, but I also recognize that they are the highest court, and we have to we have to take the courts as they are, not as we wish them to be. And that we also have had some wins before the Supreme Court. We've had some voting case wins. There have been some civil liberties wins, not as many as there should be, but there have been some. I'm just wondering, I feel like increasingly, though, I am an outlier in that people have become much more stridently anti Supreme Court. And I'm just wondering, like from your vantage point, which is, a pretty high perch, how do you think of the roles of the federal judiciary generally and the Supreme Court in particular? I'll be right back with more of my conversation with Senator Richard Blumenthal in a moment. But I started Democracy Docket in 2020 to be the leading source of news, information, and analysis around voting and elections in court. And with all of the rising threats right now, the Democracy Docket team's work is more critical than ever. But that's why it needs your help to hold Donald Trump and the Republicans accountable. For $10 a month, you can get access to exclusive events, insights from me, and much, much more. But most importantly, you'll be supporting this critical effort in this great time of need. Become a premium member now by clicking on the link in the description below.
I don't view myself as having, I wish I had a high perch, but uh, well, just to give you a little bit of background, I was a law clerk for a district court judge in Connecticut, John Newman, and then I was a law clerk for a Supreme Court Justice, Harry Blackmun. I have reverence for the courts. I was a litigator for most of my career.
Yes.
I was a prosecutor, U.S. attorney in Connecticut, chief federal prosecutor, and then attorney general in my state for 20 years. And I loved trying cases. And I did 3 arguments in the United States Supreme Court. And I continue to have reverence for the courts. I still go to the courts. As a matter of
Right.
fact, for immigration and naturalization ceremonies, I go to see judges. I regard them as heroes sometimes, and we've seen their mettle tested. And I agree with you that the district court judges and some of the courts of appeals have really stood their ground and defended the rule of law. The United States Supreme Court has been beyond disappointment. I have
Yes.
said publicly, I'll repeat it here, they have become a bunch of politicians in robes. And that is really a disgrace to the nation. You can see the political impulse in many of their decisions, and the Chief Justice has, I think, thought that he would have some legacy to defend, but it has gradually been degraded. And we could spend the rest of this time and probably a good many hours afterward, you and I, talking about the Supreme Court. But the net result, I think, has been to cost the court a lot of its credibility. And, the Supreme Court has no armies, it has no police force, it has no way of enforcing its position. The mystique of its objectivity and independence and being above politics is what causes people to obey Supreme Court decisions. And when it becomes just another political branch, it sacrifices that trust and credibility that's so essential to its power and its place in our democracy. So I think this Supreme Court is doing lasting damage to the court as an institution. And I'm hoping that in Louisiana versus Calais, the voting rights case, that it will spare the rest of Section 2, because I think there's a political case where clearly the rule of law is at stake, and yet the Republicans obviously are pressing very, very hard to degrade the elective process, another topic that we could
Yeah.
cover. Um, and the Supreme Court may become party to that effort.
And
So,
I'm not optimistic. And I'm not optimistic. I mean,
right.
I tell you, my law firm, we brought the original case in Louisiana on behalf of black voters that led to the creation of two rather than one black opportunity districts under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Then a group of white plaintiffs challenged that successful remedy, and that case went to the Supreme Court. And this honestly should have been a layup. Like the Supreme Court should have just said, no, we're not taking the case for argument. Instead, they took it for argument. It went all the way through argument, and then they then rescheduled it for argument and ordered the parties to brief and argue something that neither party had sought. Like no one in the case said that they thought Section 2 of the Constitution
Yeah.
Section 2 was unconstitutional. It literally wasn't even part of the case. I mean, the case that the white plaintiffs brought to the Supreme Court was a racial gerrymandering case, which is under the Constitution, has nothing to do with Section 2. And the Supreme Court had to go out of its way to force the parties to brief and argue this. And so now we are awaiting this decision. And so I agree with you that it is, like, I don't want to sugarcoat this. It is not the finest hour of this court.
It is not the finest hour of this court. And for me, the defining moment was Dobbs.
Mm,
You
yeah.
know, in so many ways, in its impact on quality of life for mostly women, let's be honest, families, it has such really detrimental effect. And legally, to discard Roe in the way that they did it, I don't need to tell probably anybody who's listening how unprecedented it was, in recent history at least, and the defiance of stare decisis and all the principles that underlie Supreme Court jurisprudence was just absolutely astonishing and abhorrent. So for me, that was the train wreck. And
Yeah,
afterward, you know, nothing surprises me.
right.
I'm still shocked, but not surprised at what the Supreme Court is doing.
Yeah, well, I just want to lay out a little bit the Louisiana versus Calais and get your reaction because you are, as you say, both an accomplished lawyer, a former Supreme Court clerk, and also now a senator. And, you know, the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, which gave black men the right to vote, later extended to women, gives Congress, like specifically Congress, the right to pass, to enact appropriate legislation to ensure the voting rights of minority voters, particularly black voters. And Congress exercised that power in 1965 with the Voting Rights Act. It exercised that power again over and over again with reauthorizing and broadening the Voting Rights Act. The provision of the Voting Rights Act that is now under attack in the Supreme Court came in 1982, in the 1982 amendments, which were, by the way, not only passed with overwhelmingly bipartisan margins, but signed into law by Ronald Reagan, who called it the crown jewel of American democracy. And, I mean, I would hate it, and I'm sure you would hate it, but at any given day, John Thune and Mike Johnson could call a vote on the House, Senate, and Senate floors to overturn Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, right? Congress enacted it, Congress should repeal it, but Congress hasn't done that. And so here we are in 2025, and this law that has been reaffirmed by Congress over and over again, pursuant to constitutional authority, it is granted. And we are facing a world in which supposedly originalists, textualists, are telling us that they actually don't think that this is necessary anymore. Like if it's not necessary anymore, tell it to Congress. Like Congress can make that decision. I don't agree that it's not. I think it is still necessary, but ultimately, isn't that a decision for you and your colleagues to make? Like, why is the Supreme Court think they're going to make this decision?
And it is the most activist court in
Yeah,
that
right.
sense in recent history. We've had conservatives as justices, and when I was a law clerk to Justice Blackmun, he was pretty conservative. He grew and evolved in his thinking, but uh, Justice Powell, Justice Rehnquist, uh, but they really believed that these legislative decisions were for the Congress to make, not for the court. And what this court has done is usurp that legislative function and then also empower the executive, the
Right.
president, to seize more power. The immunity decision, for example, which in my view is another part of this train wreck, to say that the president of the United States can never be prosecuted for what he does while he is in the White House breaking the law, potentially literally stealing or killing people illegally, which arguably is happening in the strikes to
Mhm.
the boats out in the Caribbean. The shift here is really a seismic one. It's a structural shift in power, and it's happening obviously with Republicans in Congress, again, ceding to the president powers and authority that they're unwilling to exercise. It's not only that they're unwilling to stand up to him, it's that they are ceding and giving him powers that really changes the entire structural complex of our democracy in a way that eliminates a lot of those checks and balances that the founders relied on to make sure our liberties were preserved.
Yeah. So I want to take advantage of your experience as a former U.S. attorney and former AG, as well as your current position. So everyone needs to know how rare it is for a former Supreme Court clerk to be willing to talk about the court that way. I mean, it's just like former clerks are not built that way, and so the senator deserves an enormous amount of credit for being willing to do that. But I think even more so than that, has been your willingness to speak out about what's happening at the Department of Justice. Because I know you have a lot of reverence also for, you were probably a Supreme Court clerk for what, a year, and you were a
Yeah.
prosecutor for probably what, like 20 years, you know. Uh,
I was U.S. attorney for 4.5 years, but then I was attorney general for 20 years.
Yeah,
So
right. Okay, so 24 years you were a prosecutor. So, talk about what you see happening at the Department of Justice and how difficult it must be for you to see, what you've dedicated a big part of your career to the idea of equal justice under the law, prosecuting crimes, not people, the keeping politics out of this process. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing and, what you make of it.
the Department of Justice for me is an institution that should embody literally justice, and it has. When you think of its really storied history in enforcing civil rights laws, Burke Marshall and John Doerr and all of the Justice Department attorneys who went into the South and made sure that there was desegregation, all of the areas where it has really performed that function of protecting justice. And as United States Attorney, I prosecuted corruption. I went to the Department of Justice for advice and counsel and the the expertise, the experience, the skills, but most important, the dedication to justice. There's a quote from uh, Justice Jackson, who was in law enforcement before he became a justice, that the most important thing for a government lawyer to do is not to win the case, but to do justice.
Mm.
And that means dismissing a case if you find out that you've wrongly charged someone. You have to seek justice. And my rule was if you can't prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, you have no business charging anyone. And the most consequential decisions I made were whether to charge someone because the charge itself will change someone's life beyond uh, return. Because half the world believes somebody's guilty if charged. If he's acquitted, they believe he got off on a technicality. So the weaponization of the Department of Justice is really shocking and repugnant to me. And the use of it for retribution is so beyond my comprehension. It would have been unthinkable to me. Donald Trump wanted to do it in his first term.
Hmm.
And even his henchmen said, no, that's a bridge too far. You can't use it for personal animosity or political vengeance or vanity. And now he has his former personal lawyers in positions of top responsibility ready to do his bidding and to prosecute James Comey or Tish James or possibly others, where, in my view, there's probably nowhere near enough even to establish probable cause of a crime, let alone proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And so I think the impact is far reaching. First of all, think of what the consequences will be. There's a saying, I think it came from the Russian head of intelligence: show me the person and I'll show you the crime.
Yeah, the head of the secret police under Stalin.
And that's what we have right now. For me, that is probably the most telling mark of a totalitarian regime where vengeance and retribution and political enforcement becomes the modus operandi of its Department of Justice, and where justice is so demeaned and degraded. So, you're absolutely right. I will never forget the first day I went to the department and I walked down those marble walls and floor to meet the Attorney General of the United States. The first one I met was Griffin Bell at
Oh,
the
wow.
time, uh, under President Carter, but then I've known all the other attorneys general since then. And there is a tradition and ethos in the Department of Justice that, um, you know, I think this administration has so violated, and there'll be an impact on the American people, not least, and I say this as the father of three lawyers and another son who is hopefully becoming a lawyer. Uh,
Depends how you look at it, hopefully. I'm not sure that is what I would choose,
well,
but
he's
yes,
in.
hopefully now that he started down the path.
Yeah, now that he's started down the path, he's at Yale Law School, so I hope it all goes
Yes.
well. But you know, they really would be very reluctant to sign up for this Department of Justice because it has been so degraded. And I talk frequently to people who are in the department now and whose morale has just been
Right.
decimated. Um, so you know all this, others do as well, but I think it's really lamentable.
Yeah, so I want to ask you one more question about your experience with the Department of Justice, because I think it's important. This is one of the places where historical experience and context matters, and so you've known attorneys general as a federal prosecutor, you've known attorneys general as a state, the chief law enforcement officer of state, and you've known attorney general as a senator. And I assume you've known them of both parties. You've confirmed some, you've may have voted against some, but you've had the full picture. And like Pam Bondi's Department of Justice looks nothing like from the outside, even what, who Sessions, even who I thought was a crazy right wing Republican senator, who people forget was the first attorney general. I don't know whether you voted for him or not, but in retrospect, he was like nothing like Pam Bondi. Bill Barr, who I was very critical of, nothing like Pam Bondi. I'm sure you could list a whole bunch of other Republican attorneys general who you've worked with. Nothing like what we are experiencing right now.
Nothing like it at all, because they all had lines, ethical lines, that they wouldn't cross. And they all had a sense of self respect that they strove to maintain. And I can tell you some were better than others, but Sessions got into trouble when he wouldn't, he recused himself.
Right.
If
That's
you'll
right.
recall, he
That's right.
said, "No, ethically, I don't think I can get involved in that
What
uh,
became the Mueller investigation, right?
the Mueller investigation exactly." Um, and it was the right decision, but Trump never forgave him because Trump had no lines, or he has no lines now any more than he did then. So whether I respected their intellect or not, whether I agreed with them or not, at least they drew lines and they had around them people who would maintain some oversight and scrutiny, who would shame them if they were tempted to do otherwise into respecting those lines. And I think that is completely lacking in this Department of Justice. Much to my chagrin about Todd Blanche,
Mhm.
because he was a real lawyer
He was a
for
real lawyer.
a
Absolutely.
good part of his career, and then he
Yeah.
represented Donald Trump, and now he seems to have abandoned those kinds of ethical lines.
Can you, I talk to a lot of folks and we tend to focus on the courts. We focus on the Department of Justice. We focus on elections. But I want to take this opportunity because you do, whether you admit it or not, you do sit on a very high perch. Um, at the beginning of the administration, we heard a lot about Doge, and then kind of Doge sort of fell out of the news. Then we heard a lot about rescissions, which is like a very technical thing, but has to do with government spending and the ability of the White House to ignore essentially congressional appropriations. You know, beyond the Department of Justice, beyond the courts, what do you see Donald Trump doing to the government? Like what does someone who isn't in your position but wants to sort of understand, they tuned in around USAID being shut down, but then that sort of, like I said, just went off the radar screen. And now there's sort of a sense that Donald Trump is sort of paying some things and not paying other things. From your vantage point, what does the federal government and services to American citizens look like?
The government is shrinking in how effectively it delivers services. I see it, for example, in the Veterans Administration. I'm the ranking member on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and veterans have to wait longer, for example, for radiology results when they go to a VA facility. One seemingly minor example of the increase in wait times for service. Um, and Donald Trump is shrinking the government as a result of DOJ. Obviously, also the impoundment of funds,
Impoundment,
which
right?
I
That's
regard
the
as,
term I meant, not rescissions, I guess.
well, he's doing both,
Okay.
uh, but he is endlessly distracting from what he's doing. And I'll tell you, uh, just to encroach a little bit on the area where you are most expert,
Yeah.
um, on the cybersecurity and infrastructure agency and on the voting rights division of the civil rights division of the Department of Justice. In those two branches of our government, which are responsible for assuring integrity in the voting process, he has decimated them. He's reassigned or fired or shrunk the agencies. So voting rights are very much at issue and at stake. Of course, he's done a bunch of other things like collecting voter roll data, issuing executive orders that dismantle the voting machines that we rely on, a panoply of stuff to put in danger our elections, not the least of them, the redistricting that's
Yep.
taken place. You're the expert in this area and you're on the front lines, you're in the trenches. Uh, but his changing the nature of government has also affected voting rights in a very tangible way.
It absolutely has. And, if you take Donald Trump literally based on what he has said and what he's posted on social media, he has said he not only wants to institute national photo ID laws, he not only wants to institute proof of citizenship registration laws that would disenfranchise, for example, married women who change their last name, as well as really anyone who doesn't either have a passport or an original certified birth certificate. He has said he wants to do away with all mail in voting. He has said he wants to do away with, as you point out, decertify many voting machines. And most recently, and this didn't get as much attention, he posted on social media he wants to do away with early voting. So literally, the only thing that would be left would be election day voting on voting equipment he approves of, and with ID laws he wants, with registration laws he wants. There'd be no early voting. There'd be no vote by mail. And then finally, and I think that this has really not gotten the attention it needs. He said that he believes the states are his agents. That's his word, agents, for counting and tabulating voting results. And so he also wants to control how the votes are counted. And so to me, this is not just like we're headed towards authoritarianism. I mean, like his plan here is to undermine free and fair elections. Now, I hope he doesn't get away with it. We're going to fight in court to try to prevent him from getting away with it. You're going to do, everything you can to keep him from getting away with it. But I don't know that there has been the level of alarm raised about all this. And that's before you get to, by the way, as you say, the fact that the Department of Justice is collecting every American's voting records, everyone, every state. They want access to everyone's personal voting information, and they're suing 8 states who have so far refused to turn them over. My law firm and I have intervened to defend in all 8 of those cases voters. But this all just, I look at 2026 and say we're going to have elections for sure, but how fair and free they are is kind of up in the air. And I'm wondering if you agree with that assessment, and if you think that there's enough urgency around this.
I not only agree with it, but I am deeply frightened about it because, as John Lewis used to say, of all the rights we have, voting rights are at the pinnacle because they determine the effectiveness of all our other rights. And that is why I have begun a major effort. I'm going to begin speaking on the floor. I have a speech prepared, which I can give to you if you have 20 minutes to spare right now.
Absolutely.
But seriously, I'm going to be organizing my colleagues in floor blocks, as we call them, which are every one of us in the group coming to the floor at the same time and engaging in a colloquy and trying to sound the alarm and elevate this issue, because you're absolutely right that unless Americans understand what's happening here, this totalitarian regime will literally take away what's left of our rights. And it's not just on the horizon at some distant future, it's happening in real time right now, eliminating early voting, collecting data on voters, uh, uh, taking charge of the voting systems in the states, and frankly, engendering fear and terror in the voting, in the workers who are responsible
Right.
for assuring the integrity on the ground. And we've all encountered, we go to vote and we see the workers there who take our names and they check our IDs. If they're fearful about showing up on election day or with early voting before election day, um, it will be truly a meaningless process. And I think maybe very telling is Steve Bannon
Hmm.
saying
Yes.
that Congress is the Duma,
Hmm.
that
Yep.
Congress is like the Russian Duma, where they have no power
Yep.
because it's all rigged. The election's rigged. The Congress is rigged. They have a constitution in Russia, which
That's right. And they
actually
have
is
elections in
not.
Russia.
It's a lot longer than ours, with a lot more rights to people, and they're all meaningless because there are no independent courts or independent legislative branch. So, uh, all you need to do is listen to Bannon and some of the other MAGA influencers and interlocutors, and you get a pretty clear picture of where Donald Trump is going. And it is toward a monarchy. In fact, it's just simply a totalitarian government. Putin is not a monarch. He's more effective than any existing monarch is, more powerful, I should say, maybe not more effective. But, it is deeply frightening, and we do need to sound the alarm. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and look, I always say, Vladimir Putin loves elections. Like, Vladimir Putin doesn't get rid of elections. He loves elections. I mean, they're not fair and free. I mean, they're just kind of a joke, but it gives him the affirmation that he can use as part of his propaganda efforts. And thing I listed, that isn't even talking about the deployment of ICE or the military and what that could do to election day. That's not even before you get to the fact that the Republican Party continues to grind away its voter suppression war machine. That's before you get to the redistricting stuff. I mean, there is a total picture here of what Donald Trump plans and what his allies are empowering him to do. That is quite frightening. And I'm thrilled to hear that you're going to be leading an effort. This is news to me, and this is great news. I'm happy to review whatever you have. And also, I hope you'll let us know, because Democracy Docket will cover whatever you and your colleagues are doing, because it's like from my standpoint, it is the most important thing for people to hear.
Well, I am springing you on it without any advance notice. I apologize.
Wow.
But I think what you're doing is exactly what I want to support in the effort here. And I think the No Kings rallies and hands off and the indivisible work has been absolutely fantastic in raising awareness. And what I have said when I go to all these rallies, I've been to all of them, um, not all of them in Connecticut, but five the weekend before last. And
Five's a lot. Let's be honest. Five's a lot of rallies to go to. Don't be
well,
hard on yourself.
wi- on one day, I'm very proud that I got to Hartford, Windsor, Willimantic, Granby, and New London, all
All
in the
right.
same. Not easy to do, but
I'm gonna I'm
what
gonna
I
I'm gonna I'm gonna give you a little insight to my thinking. So my wife, who grew up in Fairfield County, Connecticut, she took me once to visit Washington, Connecticut. Could
yeah,
be the most beautiful place on earth. So
it
I don't
is.
know why you didn't find I don't know why you didn't find a rally there, because if I were you, I'd find reasons to go there.
Well, I have been to Washington, Connecticut recently for a rally, uh, but it is that northwest corner is just absolute. And at this time of year, with the foliage turning, you should visit Washington, Connecticut again. But let me just say, I urge the groups, because they ask me, what can we do to support the organizations that are doing exactly what you're doing, to support groups that are raising awareness, because we can and we must fight back. And organizations like yours are literally at the tip of the spear in this fight. And you personally, I think, you know, I've given you my personal thanks before, but let me do it in this public setting. Um, really are doing so much to preserve our democracy, but you have company in others, and we should be supporting every effort at the national level, but also at the state level
Yeah.
to fight back in the courts. Because going back to the point you made earlier, the the courts continue to provide a bulwark, a firewall, and there are judges, just as there have been throughout our history, who are willing to stand up. I think about the judges in the South who desegregated the schools. Frank Johnson, district court judge in the South, whose home was picketed and I think even firebombed. So there are examples of courage and grace under pressure on the part of our judiciary, and I am hopeful that they will continue to provide that bulwark.